Somewhere and nowhere there lived a king with his wife, the queen, and their beautiful daughter. The king was sad because his wife died, and the daughter was sad because her mother died. And the king grieved for a year. He sat over the tomb and he wept, his head bowed. But after a year had passed, he took his wife's anklet and he decreed, "I will marry again, for that was my wife's wish. I will marry a maiden whom this anklet fits." And the women who advised him, the matchmakers, they took that anklet and they set off around the city and the kingdom searching for a woman whose ankle would fit into that anklet. But the anklet was so fine and no woman's ankle was slender enough, and they returned with no news. "But there is one," said an old woman, "whose ankle it may fit, and that is the princess. She is now a young woman." And so it was that the anklet was put upon her foot, and indeed it fitted. And the king let arrangements be made. "I will marry the princess, my daughter." Well, strange. The girl was sitting in her own chamber, surrounded by her maids. She was happy. And then the news came that she was to be married. "Who will be my groom?" But this was a secret that must be kept. Fine clothes were brought for the wedding. Dresses of colourful silks, jewellery that dripped from her ears, rings upon her fingers, bangles on her wrists. She wore the anklet she had inherited from her mother. But the night of the wedding came, and she still did not know, and she asked the minister's daughter, "Tell me, who is the man that I will marry?" "I will tell you the secret," she said, "if you will give me a golden bangle from your wrist." So she took off a golden bangle, and the minister's daughter put it on and admired it. "Such joy, you are fortunate. A king will be your husband." "A king? Which king?" "Why, this king, your father." And with that, the daughter's hands began to tremble. The blood drained from her face. She was in shock. "Away, all my maids, away, away, before the king comes," for she knew that he would come soon. And when they had all left her chamber, she ran onto the balcony and leapt high from the balcony, clearing the walls of the palace. And she landed in a pile of old leather skins. This was the tanner's yard. The tanner, he who skinned animals and turned their skins into leather for boots and bags. The tanner, a poor man, was surprised to see this princess in such fine jewellery. "I will pay you, tanner. I will pay you a handful of gold. Take it for you and your family, if you will make by dawn tomorrow morning a coat of skins for me, with 2 eye holes." Well, the tanner was delighted. He and his children and his wife worked all night, and they made a strange coat of animal skins. It was ugly and rough, but it was completed before dawn. And she put it over her. She looked strange, misshapen, but she could see through the 2 eye holes. And she went stumbling away from the palace until she came to the city gate, which was still locked, for it was not yet morning. And she lay down, just like a heap of old ragged skins. Now the king had come to his daughter's chamber to marry her, and he had found it empty. "This cannot be," said the king. "Guards, search the city and find the princess." Well, the guards went running into the streets and searched far and wide. One came to the city gate and stumbled over a pile of rags. "What are you?" he said. "I'm Dew-Leather, coat of skins. My eyes are dim, I cannot see. My ears are weak, I cannot hear. I care for no one, far or near." And the guard went on. But now dawn came, and the gate was unlocked and opened. And the princess, stumbling, went away from the palace. She turned, and now beyond the walls she lifted the hem of skins and began to run, one foot carrying her forward and the other setting her down. She ran and ran. And one day she came to another kingdom, another city. And she ran through the gates and to the wall of the palace, and there she dropped down exhausted in a heap. Now it just so happened that the queen of that other kingdom, who lived in a separate palace from the king, as was the custom, she was finishing her meal, and her maid took a bucket full of slops to the window to throw it out. And she saw down below this strange, monstrous pile of skins with two eyes glaring up, and the maid was afraid. She went to the queen and said, "Oh, queen, there is some kind of spirit or monster hiding beyond the wall." "A monster?" said the queen. "Bring her here." Well, the maid was afraid. She went out and down and came to this pile of skins. She tugged. She dragged this creature, this monster, into the palace and before the queen. "Ah," said the queen, "what a monstrous sight! What are you?" And she answered as before. "I say it, then you say it. I'm Dew-Leather, coat of skins. I'm Dew-Leather, coat of skins. My eyes are dim, I cannot see.
My eyes are dim, I cannot see.
My ears are weak, I cannot hear.
My ears are weak, I cannot hear.
I care for no one, far or near."
Care for no one, far or near.
"Ha-ha!" said the queen. "How strange, how wonderful! You will remain here, you misshapen creature. I will give you work in the kitchen. You will scrape the pots and the pans. You will wipe the ashes from the grate of the fire, and we will feed you in return. And then you will entertain me at times." So Dew-Leather, she hobbled off to the grate and swept out the ashes, and when the pots and the pans were filthy with grease, she scraped them. This was the worst job, but she was grateful to be fed. Time went by, and the queen and the cooks and the maidservants, although she was poor, they admired Dew-Leather for her hard work. One day the queen came to her. "Dew-Leather, have you heard? Tonight there will be a gathering. All the harem of the king, all of the maidservants and all of the slave girls will be invited to the Sultan's palace, my husband's palace. And there will be a feast. All girls are invited. And Dew-Leather, I invite you." I'm Dew-Leather. Say it with me. I'm Dew-Leather, coat of skins. My eyes are dim, I cannot see. My ears are weak, I cannot hear. I care for no one, far or near. "I leave you then." And the queen went with all the other maidservants away from her palace to the palace of the Sultan. And there they sat around drinking and eating sweetmeats, but the door opened, and there stood a woman never seen before. She was tall and slender like a cypress tree. Her face glowed like the rising full moon. There were jewels upon her, and the most wonderful, colourful silks. Everyone was in awe. You know who it was. Dew-Leather had taken off her coat of skins and had entered the Sultan's palace, and there she sat and all talked to her. She entertained them with stories and songs, but however much they asked her, she did not give them her name or where she came from. Finally, the night was passing, and Julida, she took a handful of golden sequins from a fold of her sash, and she scattered them upon the floor. The maidservants and the slave girls and even the ladies got down on the floor to scoop up these golden sequins, and as they did so, she made her escape out of the door and back to the Queen's palace, back to the kitchens, where once more she put on her coat of skins and hid by the fire. Now the Queen returned a short time later. Julida, oh, you should have come. There was such a princess. Ah, the Queen could not stop talking about this wondrous princess who had come to their party the night before. But none knew who she was. She talked to her own son, the prince. Oh, my son, there was a woman of such beauty. Like the moon, her face shone. If only I had found out her name, that I might betroth you and her, that you might be married. And as the prince listened, his heart thudded in his chest. Oh mother, we must find out who she is. Let my father arrange another party this evening, and I will wait outside the door and discover her identity. And so it was the Sultan held another gathering that night. Another celebration, another feast, and all were invited, and the Queen came to that ragged heap of skins and said, Julida, come to the gathering tonight, to the party, you will meet the princess. But you know what she said. She said, I'm Julida, coat of skins, my eyes are dim, I cannot see, my ears are weak, I cannot hear, I care for no one, far or near. The Queen went with all the maidservants to the Sultan's palace, and there they gathered, expectant, waiting, watching the door. They could not keep themselves quiet. The door opened, and there she stood, as tall and as beautiful, with the same delightful gown as the day before. Oh, she shone, her face like the rising moon. She was of such beauty, as tall as a cypress tree. They were astonished by her. They gathered around her, ushered her to their seat, they pressed her with questions. She told them stories, she sang them songs. They played games through the night. But however much they asked her, she would not tell them who she was or where she came from. And shortly before dawn, she took from a fold of her sash, she took a handful of shining pearls, and she scattered them on the floor. And all of the women got down to gather up the pearls, and she made her escape through the door. But as she came through the door, who gripped her hand? The prince. And he saw her beauty. Oh, you must be my wife. Tell me who you are and where you come from. But she pulled and pulled and pulled herself away. And as she pulled the prince's ring from his finger. And she fled. And he called after her, tell me where you come from. Ha ha, she said, I come from the land of pots and pans. And away she fled to the Queen's palace, and there she went into the kitchen. She put on her coat of skins, and she lay down by the fire, where she scraped the pots and pans, and shortly afterwards the Queen came in. The prince is heartbroken. He wants to marry the princess that was there today. You should have seen her. Such beauty, even more than the night before. But she escaped, and my son did not discover who she was. The next morning, Prince came to his mother. I am leaving, mother. I must search for that princess. She told me she comes from the land of pots and pans. I have never heard of it, but I will find it. I am leaving immediately. Wait, my son, wait. I understand. You must go. But you will go with an entourage of servants. You will take my finest tent, and you will take food. Let the kitchens prepare cakes. And in the kitchens there was much baking through that day. Juleda, in her coat of skins, shuffled up to the table where the baker was working. She watched and held out her hands. "You cannot bake," said the baker. "You cannot see, you cannot hear, you know nothing of baking." But he liked her for the hard work that she had done, scraping the pots and pans all of these months. And finally he gave her a small piece of dough, and she shaped it. And she put it in the oven with the rest, and it was put with the other cakes. And now, the next day, the prince left with his entourage on horses and camels. They set off, waving goodbye to his mother. "I will find the land of pots and pans." And away he rode. Far across the desert they came. The way was long and hard. And when they came to the hottest part of the desert, at the hottest time of the day, where the sun was at its zenith, he said, "Let us now rest." And the tent was put up, and inside he sat. And food was brought. And when it was unwrapped, a small loaf, a small cake was cast aside. "What is that? Food must not be wasted," said the prince. "Oh, you should not eat that one. It was made by Juleda, a slave from the kitchen. She's unclean. You should not eat this one." "No food should be wasted," said the prince. "Bring it to me." And he took that small cake, and he tore it open to bite. But what did he see? Inside that cake, he saw his own ring. And he put the ring on his finger. "Let us pack up the tent, we will return at all speed." Well, once everything was packed, he got on his horse, and there were the camels behind, but they could not keep up. He rode like the wind. He rode across the desert and all the way back to his mother's palace. And there he entered. "You cannot come in," said his mother. "Women only are allowed. You know this. Go to your chamber." "Juleda must bring me my supper," he said. "Juleda? She must carry it to me." Well, his mother agreed, but strange request. He went to his chamber, and a tray was prepared with all fine foods for the prince. "Juleda, you must take this." Well, Juleda managed to get to her feet. She set the tray upon her head, and she walked haltingly out of the queen's palace to the palace of the prince. Up she went, step by step by step, until she came to the door of his room. The door opened, and there he was. "I order you to come in." She did not want to come in. She said, "I'm Juleda, coat of skins, my eyes are dim, I cannot see, my ears are weak, I cannot hear, I care for no one far or near." But he ordered her in. He put the food on his table. "Now bring me that jug of wine to my glass to fill it." And as she stepped forward, the prince, he drew his sharp dagger from his belt, and he slashed the coat of skins, and it fell to the floor. Before him stood a princess of such beauty, the young woman he had seen outside the palace, but now she was more splendid than ever. "Oh, you gave me my ring back in that cake. This was a promise, was it not?" And she smiled. "Then you will take me as your husband?" And she smiled again. He heard his mother's footsteps outside the door. "Quick, hide in the corner." His mother came in. "Oh, my son, what have you done? You have murdered my slave." She looked at the rags of leather all slashed and torn upon the ground. "Oh, no, mother," he said, "indeed not. I will show you who she is." And from the corner there stepped that princess, and his mother was amazed. A wedding was arranged. People came from far and wide. There was great celebration, but strange to say, still no one knew her name or who she was. She would not tell them. They lived together well, the prince and his wife. One day, from her window, that princess, newly married, saw an old man come into the square at the heart of that city. And she recognized him. Although he had aged and was stooped and forlorn, she knew this old man as her father. And she said to her husband, "You see this old king? Bring him in and feed him." And the prince brought him into the palace, and she hid and watched. And she had never seen her father so sad, even when he was mourning for his wife, her mother. He could not speak. He only ate and drank. And at the end he said, "No, I must leave." "Stay," said the prince. "Stay, as it has been declared that all must be given hospitality when they are welcomed in my house." He went out, the prince, and he said, "Who is that old man?" "Lend me your turban and your clothes," said his wife. And now dressed as her husband, she went in and spoke to her father, who did not recognize her. "Let me tell you a story, old man. There was once a king who had a wife and a daughter, and she told the whole story as I have told it to you. And when she got to the part about when the girl was dressed in a coat of skins and ran away, he said, 'Hush, hush, do not tell me. Oh, such pain. How could a father have mistreated his daughter so wrong, so bad, so evil?' When he learned that she had become a slave, he was distraught. But she went on telling the story until she got to the very end. And here am I, that wife dressed as her husband. And she took off her turban and her clothes, prince, and beneath there she was, that princess, and he knew his daughter. Father, you are forgiven. You were troubled and tormented. Here, stay and live with us." And so it was that king died happy with his own daughter and her husband. And they lived well